Part of what we do here at the Crow Hill Company is do monthly or 6 weekly challenges. It's a biggie, but I think one that you'll really enjoy because it will give you a brief that will be quite tight, but it's an interesting and fun brief. So basically what I'm going to do today is talk about what I just brought up was what I mentioned on the vlog, this idea of producing lots of bits of music. That documentaries, they contain lots of different segments, and you have to be very conscious about the viewers that are watching documentaries. Now, when you're doing stuff for, say, the BBC, I did a lot of documentaries for Time Watch. They made me very aware, and they were very strict, that the average age of a viewer was something like in their mid-60s. Basically, the largest viewership was people in their very late 50s through to 90s. And what happens with the human brain as you get older is it struggles to differentiate between different sounds. So as a consequence, when it's not voiceover playing over, say, archive footage, when it's a contributor, i.e. someone speaking to camera, who naturally, because it's not a rehearsed voiceover with diction and compression and all of that kind of stuff, it's just someone in a room. What happens is if you put score underneath, people of a certain age find it very, very difficult to be able to separate the score from the dialogue, and they miss important points. So when working on Time Watch, they would say, please, please, please don't put music under the contributors because we'll get tons of complaints coming in. They couldn't hear the stuff. It was a problem that Downton Abbey actually had throughout its run, that they really used the music to give a sense of importance to stuff that was going on in this country home. But the older audience found it incredibly difficult to I'll say here in inverted commas, hear the dialogue, but actually what it is, it's an ability to really separate those things, and it's all to do with brain power. I remember doing I'll stop waffling in a sec, but I remember doing a documentary about the human brain. They say it's really interesting. The best way of describing how the human brain kind of ages is if you watch a group of teenagers walking along a path and they come across a fallen tree. They'll negotiate the tree and get over it and continue talking. If you watch a bunch of maybe 60-year-olds walking down a path, they'll be talking away. They'll see the tree. They'll all stop talking as they negotiate the tree, go to the other side of the tree, and they'll start talking again. So it's just about kind of brain function. So it's just an important thing to consider. So what we're looking at today is there's this video that we put out, part of our Adventures in Sound series, that's absolutely smashing it. And I'm really proud of the team because I had nothing to do with it, which is great news for me. And it's a video about the Paris turn of the century, Eric Satie, Debussy, that kind of stuff. So what I've done is, the preparation I've done is I've watched it and I've found just a little bit where there's some archivey, montagey bits which definitely need music, whilst also being aware that when we cut back to Theo, who's the presenter, that he's standing out in the street, there's street traffic noise, all of that kind of stuff. And really, again, thinking about like the Time Watch style audience, it's probably best not to underscore and certainly not to do stuff that's too melodic. So what I've just done is I've literally dragged the movie file into Logic. It gives me the option to extract the audio track. This is really important to do if there is temp score on. There isn't on this. And what I'm just going to do is find the spot that I'm talking about. And yeah, I mean, you'll see that the reason I picked this spot is because it talks about minimalism, which basically means I can create some music that is minimalistic. I think it's after the Popeye section. It's after the section in the synth swap. It's a great film. If you haven't seen it, maybe we can link it below, Alan or Simon, in the video description. I'm just going to find this spot. Now, when I'm working at a rate, I tend to, if I can, find a nominal tempo for the entire show, and I'll do it in a simple single Logic arrangement. This has its ups and downs. If you are working something you're expecting to get recuts, this can cause problems. But I do find that there is a general kind of cadence or tempo to any piece. And what I will simply do is I will find a nominal tempo and then do subdivisions like double time, and then even maybe do like a triplet time, but counting in fours. So I'll be counting triplets across the metronome, even though I won't be working in, is it compound time? Okay, let me just find this this section on, it's a shot of Brian Eno, I think it's past this, talking about Eric Satie, because he was a total, here we go, there's Brian Eno. So let's just have a little look at this.
Ambient music. Long before Brian Eno coined the term, Satie was imagining music that was more part of an environment than a spectacle. He coined a concept called furniture music, which is music that's meant to blend into the background and be a part of life rather than a performance. Brian Eno, credited with defining the modern ambient genre, explicitly cited Satie as a precursor. You can hear Satie's influence in the slow tempos, repeating patterns and structures of minimalist composers like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, as well as modern ambient composers like Aphex Twin and neoclassical composers such as Olafur Arnalds and Nils Frahm.
Gaps.
With Satie being the forefather of ambient music, it's only fitting that we explore the contemporary influence he had.
Okay.
Okay, so what we have currently on that section is we've got this intro here. It feels like it needs a bit of music, a bit of motivation. We go back to Theo there. I'd like to maybe just relax it for a bit. And then as he continues to talk, just come out so the music isn't becoming annoying. And then in, and then out again, and then in again. And then out to there. Now, what I'm going to do is instead of scoring to picture, I'm going to write something that I think fits the scene, but I'm going to continue past the points that I'm going to spot. Because I think there's three things that happen with documentary music. Often it is just made from library music that editors put together. And what will often happen is they will find a bit of music that they really like. And so often with temporary music, this can inform the composer. And the mistake I hear quite a lot is a composer either writing lots of different bits of music, which I find distracting, particularly if you're talking about a single subject in a single space. The other thing that I hear people make a mistake a lot of is using the same piece of music, but starting it over and over again, maybe sometimes changing the arrangement, this, that, and the other. That, I think, can become frustrating and annoying for the listener. So what I'm going to demonstrate is the idea of writing a single piece and then exploding it across a section. So it feels like you're pausing the music, not stopping it, starting something new, or stopping it and just starting it all over again. So that's the plan. So what I'm going to do is find a tempo that I think sits comfortably. Then I'll find a start point, and what I'll do is I'll just score through it. So let me just have a look now. Now, first, what I'm going to do before finding a starting point is nominate a tempo.
Pioneers.
And this is where it becomes instinctual. This is something that you only need to do a couple of documentaries, and it's just something that you find naturally, and it's got to do with any editor who is a good, experienced editor will find that there is a kind of cadence in the speech patterns of the people who are contributing, and they will edit in kind of concert with that cadence. And you'll often find you'll just sense a tempo, and that'll hit the different cuts in and out, and you won't need to kind of change it and map it too much. The other thing that I just have to say as well is is editors get really frustrated when you're just hitting their cuts all the time, because it really makes the cuts jump out. I know that there was a kind of fashion for it that started in the 1990s of, really hitting the cuts. I'm not writing an action sequence here. I'm underscoring, motivating, keeping something kind of, motoring on, and also the dead spots, establishing a scene, a sense, a feel, that kind of thing. So I'm not too worried about hitting loads of cuts, but it is, I think, nice to be working in concert with the cadence of the edits and the dialogue.
What we now call ambient music. Long before Brian Eno coined the term, Satie was imagining music that was more part of an environment than a spectacle. He coined a concept called furniture music, which is music that's meant to blend into the background and be a part of life rather than...
See, I'm hitting cuts. It's just instinctual. So I'm going to switch the metronome on.
Performance. Brian Eno...
Too fast, 110. And this will slip around when I do this.
Suspended over a simple...
A little bit too fast still. 106, let's go.
Call ambient music. Long before Brian Eno coined the term, Satie was imagining music that was more part of an environment than a spectacle. He coined a concept called furniture music, which is music that's meant to blend into the...
It just feels a little bit slow to me. So 107.
Slow, spacious melodies suspended over simple harmonies. It's this quality, music that creates an atmosphere rather than demanding attention, that makes Satie one of the earliest pioneers of what we now call ambient music. Long before Brian Eno coined the term, Satie was imagining music that was more part of an environment than a spectacle. He coined a concept called furniture music.
Yeah, this feels good to me. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, and this is really important if you're working with musicians, is musicians don't like hearing the accent. But I also think if you're going to work in this very free way with... anything that you're doing, particularly in this kind of free-form way of just working in a continuous file, is, I think, it's really annoying to have to change like the meters and this, that, and the other, like where the one of the bar is. So what I do is I take the emphasis of the metronome off, so it's just marking time for me. And a little bit like Eric Satie, I'm not conscious of bar lines. He apparently never wrote with bar lines because he was a nutter. He used to walk around Paris with a, what's it called? With a cane. He was so dislikable and such a pisshead that people used to just fight him in the street. So he had a cane with a hammer on it so he could fight off his avarices. So I basically, what I'm going to do is, if I just do this,
which is music that's meant to blend into the background and be a part of life rather than a performance. Brian Eno credited with...
Okay, so let's find where we're coming in, and then I'll start there and I'll just continue.
Long before Brian...
There we go.
Ambient music. Long before...
So this is a good example, is basically I'm going to count 3 into that bar, into that cut there. We can always tighten these things up later. Right. Theo, bye-bye for now. Just going to pull up a piano. I think what would be really suited is they're talking about Brian Eno, they're talking about ambient music, but they're also talking about Eric Satie. So what I'm going to try and do is create a bit of an homage to Satie with modern ambient kind of vibes. So I'm going to start with the piano and maybe add one more instrument to that for the sake of this workshop. So let's just load up. For any of you who don't believe that I've killed all my samples, there is proof. And what I'm going to do is the vertical piano, which is this wartime piano, which I think will suit it nicely. Okay, let's just pull that up. That's what that is. That sounds good to me. So maybe add some reverb and stuff in a bit, but I'm just going to try and work something out. Let's just hear with the tempo. So I'm going to do like a plodding... Listen to that velocity control of this... The minute you add your fifth in, it goes all bohemian, which is what we want. Okay, let's do this. And it's going to be a calamity, but I may do a couple of takes or just do some corrections after. So... feels a bit ploddy. I'm just wondering. I wonder if we should go in a kind of triplet. And that's what I mean by a subdivision. So I feel that the cadence of the piece is where the metronome sits, but I want to subdivide that to give it a slightly more motoring sense. So not changing the cadence, just changing how I count across that metronome beat. And I don't think I'm working in threes there. I might be. Yes, I am now. And a 3 count, 2, 3. Okay, that's good. Right, let's go for it. As if I wasn't going for it before. 2, 3. Okay, so just a little bit, a few schnorbits is there. So what I'm going to do is quantize. I think I'll probably need to quantize that to 12s, but so I don't make it sound like a machine, I'm going to just take the quantize strength down. So it only corrects really, there was a bit where I kind of fell off the metronome there. No, that's not correct. It is just, we just need 8s. That's what we need to do. Okay, where's my Horlicksy schnorbits? One there. Okay, so that's good. Now, what I'm going to do is put a bit of reverb on. I'm just going to be kind of working a rush mode and just add reverbs to each individual track. In this day and age, it doesn't really put too much pressure on your system. So... Now, the thing to remember is that with all the dialogue, with all the street noise, all of that top white noisy stuff that's in the dialogue, the sound of the piece that we're working on, that just will completely consume reverb. So what I'm doing is I'm putting an amount of reverb on that I wouldn't use for a record, But for this kind of application, just maybe 25, 30% more reverb will mean that you actually hear it once Theo and the street sounds of Paris go over the top. So I'm going to just try, and I'm just going to duplicate that track, and that track will have the reverb on. I'm just going to try and see if I can come up with a little bit of a top line that I can fade in and out, cut in and out, automate that kind of stuff, and then maybe just a little bit of an Eno-y pad of some sort. Up an octave. Something like that. Okay, so that's a nice little kind of chorus track. So I think I might come in on the first. Felt good to me. We probably lost the last note there, but I'll tidy that all up later. Right, one more little idea. So am I going to quantize that? Yes, but I'm going to do really lightly. So just like there, just in case I really fell off the metronome. Right, where am I going to get a pad from? What shall I use? Maybe let's have a look at one of our vaults. And I believe we did a pad of sorts somewhere. Let's have a look here. is I'm going to put an absolute bucket load of reverb on that. Let's go very large black hole. Okay, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to put a bus effect. Let's make that bus 6. And then I'm going to put a delay on that, but I'm going to make the delay 100%. And yes, that's 100. And I'm going to make it really slow. Let's do crazy. And then what I'm going to do is actually pitch that up to get my... They say it's Brian Eno, but I will maintain my favourite plugin, that this is Daniel Lenoir technique that he developed with Eno. Sorry, 2400 return. And let's put even more reverb on that. Control over the attack here. And because I'm feeling naughty, what I might do is I might rebus this. I'm glad I'm doing this after laying down the piano, because this is going to add latency. So I'm going to do that into that bus, and I'm basically going to do exactly the same again, and maybe 2 octaves might be too much, but let's just have a listen to that. That's going above human hearing, I think. So let's no plug-in. Yeah, there we go. We really only need a tiny bit of that. Okay. I think what we might do is just a little bit of a lead in there. I'm feeling indulgent, not going to quantize that, no need. So I'm just going to take this piano track duplicator. I'm duplicating it for the reverb, not for the piano. And I'm just going to find me, let's go to glass strings, and I'm just going to add a little bit of pits in, just to add to that bohemian kind of feeling that we've got. Shorts, pizzicato, and let's add the bass. Lots of bass. There's a huge latency there now because of the bussing thing that I've done, but anyway, we'll live with it. Just imagine I can't hear it. So where are we going to come in? So maybe the second time round, this opening. I think it's nicer when it comes in on that part there. Really got to chill out the pads. They are really, because they're so slow. We're not getting the chord changes are very unclean. So. Distracting myself. I will quantize that, and I'm not going to worry about that being a low strength quantize. So we might just pull that forward a bit as well. Yeah, just let's bring that forward with a delay a little bit. Okay, a few notes that are wrong here. Whatever I did there was very bad. Okay. And then here, I think we need that to be an A flat. just going to keep it there for now. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, so what I want to do is switch on Theo, our contributor, and what I'm going to do is probably up the thing here. Now, if I'd been organised, I would have put this all out of its own bus, and so that we can adjust the level of the music as a whole. I haven't been organised, so I probably need to do some jumping around with automation and stuff. But let's just hear Theo and work out where we're going to explode this cue.
Tension that makes Satie one of the earliest pioneers of what we now call ambient music. Long before Brian Eno coined the term, Satie was imagining music that was more part of an environment than a spectacle. He coined a concept called furniture music, which is music that's meant to blend into the background and be a part of life rather than a performance. Brian Eno, credited with defining the modern ambient genre, explicitly cited Satie as a precursor. You can hear Satie's influence in the slow tempos, repeating patterns and structures of minimalist composers like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, as well as modern ambient composers like Aphex Twin and neoclassical composers such as Olafur Arnalds and Nils Fram.
Okay, so what I want to do is I want to get out before excuse me, we get back to Theo here. So I'm just going to move everything along, and I'll just quickly demonstrate what a lot of editors and a lot of composers are tempted to do, which is, okay, I've got a cue there, so we go.
Cited Satie as a precursor. You can hear Satie's influence in the slow tempos, repeating patterns and structures of minimalist composers like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, as well as modern ambient composers like Aphex Twin and neoclassical composers such as Olafur Arnalds and Nils Fram.
This.
Composers such as Olafur Arnalds and Nils Fram.
You'll hear that all the time on documentaries. I think it's an unsophisticated way of doing things. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to map this out, and then I'm going to smooth all the schnoobles so that we have something that doesn't sound shit. So let's now...
Aphex Twin and neoclassical composers such as Olafur Arnalds and Nils Fram.
Okay, let's find the in.
Aphex Twin and neoclassical composers such as Olafur Arnalds and Nils Fram.
Okay.
Olafur Arnalds and Nils Fram. Nils Fram.
I'm just going to put that on that beat there.
Nils Fram.
With Satie being the forefather of ambient music, it's only fitting that we explore the contemporary influence he had.
In Paris. All the pastry shops in the world. He's in a fucking...
We're heading to Motto Books for a Patchpoint pop-up. Patchpoint is a part synth retailer, part hands-on playground, and part learning hub for electronic musicians. It is deeply rooted in experimentation and education, inviting visitors to actively engage with the gear they showcase. I can't help but notice the striking and unique instruments on Darren's table. A few of them being Siet Lombards, which are a family of wooden encased experimental electronic instruments created by instrument designer Peter Blasser. Rather than following traditional keyboard...
Okay, so I think what I would do is probably start a new queue over Motto Books. So I think what we'd need to do is find a way out.
In Paris. All the pastry shops in the world.
Which I like that over Montmartre.
In Paris.
Okay. And then okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this on back on the beat, because it's going to be really annoying to edit when we're off the beat, and I will probably just move that and make it kind of free. I might do a little bit of a slowdown here, but what I'm going to do is change the structure.
Jazzy, Popeyes.
In Paris.
Okay, so we want to cut that, shorten. That pad is really annoying. I'm going to try and do a bit of work on that. Okay, so is this where we change? Okay, good. And let's do that. Glue those together.
Paris. All the pastry shops in the world. He's in a
See.
all the pastry shops in the world. He's in a fucking.
We're heading to Motto Books for a
Okay, so what I'm going to do is
all the pastry shops in the world. He's in a fucking.
okay. So what I'm going to go here is I'm going to go to edit tempo operations, and throughout this I'm going to slow it right down to about 90 and see where we get to with that, and continue with tempo, apply. You see it's all come up there. So feel that we're coming to the end of this portion.
We're heading to Motto Books for a patch.
Okay, it's quite nice. I'm just going to take it down just one more notch to, let's take it down to 85. Apply. Actually, if we go 87, but I love it slowing over that whirligig. Okay, now what will happen when I pull this all to the right so that we hit this cut? There we go. I hope that end should knock you.
With Sati being the forefather of We're heading to Motto Books.
So from this point, what I'll then do is just go in and do a lot of MIDI fixing. I think that what I'll probably do is take the pianos down massively in level, as in velocity level, push them up in volume and really compress them so they have a more fragile quality, less strident. And then I would probably work on the delay times of that pad and pull it back into the mix so that it's not interfering too much. Just a little example of how I would fix this.
You can hear Sati's influence in the slow tempos, repeating patterns and structures.
So what I'd probably do...
into the background and be a part of life rather than a performance. Brian Eno, credited with defining the modern ambient genre, explicitly cited Sati as a precursor. You can hear Sati's influence in the slow tempos, repeating patterns and...
Let's maybe just play something in. Yeah, and that's the other thing that I find a lot of people do is there's a sensation to go, well, that's that cue finished, so let's do some form of cadence to make it feel like it's the end of the piece. It's not. it's a pause. So I'm going to create a pause at the end of this.
And be a part of life rather than a performance. Brian Eno, credited with defining the modern ambient genre, explicitly cited Satie as a precursor. You can hear Satie's influence in the slow tempos, repeating patterns, and structures of minimalist composers like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, as well as modern ambient composers like Aphex Twin.
Okay, let's just mute this pad for now. It's not working for me.
Rather than a performance. Brian Eno, credited with defining the modern ambient genre, explicitly cited Satie as a precursor. You can hear Satie's influence in the slow tempos, repeating patterns, and structures of minimalist composers like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, as well as modern ambient composers like Aphex Twin and neoclassical composers such as Olafur Arnalds and Nils Frahm.
With Satie being the forefather of ambient music, it's only fitting that we explore the contemporary influence he had.
In Paris. All the pastry shops in the world. He's in a fucking...
We're heading to Motto Books for a patch.
That's sketch stage, me mapping something out. And I hope you agree. Maybe, you know, the pause is a bit awkward. It feels a little bit like I've just added it on. But I hope you feel that feels like a slightly more sophisticated way of underscoring a documentary than just a cut and paste. So, and, you know, in total time, probably have, you know, that's from pulling the movie in, maybe spent 45 minutes on that. So I would say that's a good workflow. And then I think that what I tend to do is maybe map the whole thing out, the whole program. And then what happens then is I'm less connected to the music. I'm less emotionally in on it. I understand I understand the kind of the mechanics underneath what's going on less. I become more of a listener when I return. And at that point is the point where I go in and I start becoming a nerd, really like knitting it around the dialogue, really correcting the MIDI, all of that kind of stuff. Maybe putting some kind of ambient pad in that's more of a pedal that quotes the Eno reference, etc., etc. Shaping it against the dialogue, bit of automation, so that when I deliver it, it's something they can just slot in and not have to ride like a rodeo bull themselves. So on to the next challenge, which is a film about music in Paris and how stuff that happened at the turn of the 20th century and in the kind of the teens of the 20th century, how that has affected us today, including the birth of ambient music and how, I guess, at the beginning of the 20th century, you had this total abandonment of the stricture of harmony and tonality. I think it was it Strauss who, just before the turn of the century, came up with that insane chord from Electra. Was it Salome? It was one of the two. And it just opened this door to an atonal future. And at the beginning of the century in Paris, that's where people really started testing the boundaries of that atonality. But also, whilst becoming complex in the dissonances and the new harmonic sounds being produced, including importing a lot of jazz influence from America, this burgeoning new scene out there, what happened also at the beginning of the century in Paris was this massive simplification in a way that preceded, say, the Bauhaus movement or Kurt Weill and what's the name of that director who used to work with Kurt Weill, Alan? Oh, Brecht. Those kind of movements. It preceded all of that, this minimalism. And certainly when listening to the music of Erik Satie, it would have been extraordinarily austere and uncomplicated compared to anything that had gone before it. So this is what this film is about, and I think there's a great opportunity to cut your teeth on working on some documentary footage that's great to look at, but also has a few little tripwires for you in there. So what you do is you go to the hub. Now, this is an area full of resources and stuff to look into, stuff to work with, stuff to inspire. If you go to the Paris Composing Challenge, you'll see a page, and hopefully this will give you a real guide of what to do. There's a brief in there which I'll read out in a minute. And what you have at the top here is some assets to download. Also, there's a little link in there as well. Down at the bottom is a submission form. So basically bookmark the page, grab the assets, do your work, and then come back to this page to deliver it to us. And if you want to just look at the film with the score that we put out on it, it's there. So if you go to download assets, it'll just take you to a Google Drive. If you download that, what you'll see is a little zip. And what I'm going to do is load this into Logic. And I know that a lot of you use Logic, but the principle will be the same for Cubase or Pro Tools. I'm just going to drag it into a track and it'll create a new track for me. Now, what we have here is what's called BITC, B-I-T-C, burnt-in timecode. And this is a way of checking sync and also a way of checking stuff like the frame rate, this, that, and the other. In this day and age, it's not as disastrous if you're kind of out of sync and stuff. But basically, you'll be working from a delivery point of view with broadcast WAVs, which have timestamps baked into them in the metadata, depending on where you record them or where you render them. It's really, really important, therefore, that they have the correct time code so that when basically your editor or your dubbing engineer loads it into their machines, it synchronizes to the same position. And something that can be a real untangling is getting the frame rate wrong, because that can confuse matters. So what I'm going to do with Logic is I can see that my sequence is already starting at time 01. If we just go up here, so we've got beats and time large, we'll see we've got our time code there. So I think it's Control Movie Project Settings, and I'm just going to make this go to 01. There we go. So, and basically what, if we just check here, I'm just going to zoom out. If we check here, what I'm going to do is just check the old frame rate. So it should go to 24 and then 0. So we're at 25 frames per second, which is what my session is at. In the UK and Europe, TV tends to be 25, films tends to be 24. It's different in America, where it's often 30, sometimes 29 point something, but film is usually 24, unless you're Peter Jackson and a bit of a lunatic. 60 frames a second, no thank you. So you've got this burnt-in time code, and what's nice about that is you can check synchronization up. So we've got the time code at the bottom here, 010846, the same here. Always good just to check all the way through to the end that you're in sync, and I'm frame accurate, which is wonderful to see. Now, what you'll find here is that the music and the dialogue is combined.
I was introduced to romanticists such as Chopin, impressionists like Ravel and Debussy, and modernists such as Boulez.
What has also been provided is what editors refer to as split tracks. So we will have dialogue on one track, music on another. Just for the sake of saving download costs, we've put them in as MP3s. When you load them into Logic, these will basically be converted to WAVs. So importing a large audio file, create new tracks, and that'll title it all up for me. And again, just to be safe, instead of just dragging it, I'm just going to put that on bar 1 to make sure we're all in sync. And again, what I will do is check the sync.
Each of these figures left.
And just check the sync at the end.
I've been to Paris many times, but never.
There you go. So I'm going to mute that. And basically what you will see here is where the temp music is being put. And I know that this function, you can do it on Pro Tools as well as Cubase, is make the waves as big as possible. And then you will see where your different cues are. And checking the temp is always good. What I tend to do is check the temp for any maybe like key points that they've spotted, like is there a change, is there a transition, is there a change in meter or a modulation, those kind of things. Those things directors and editors will miss. But I try wherever possible to listen to the temp as little as possible, because inevitably I'll lean into copying it. And if the temp is unfamiliar to me, I may spend an entire day copying it without even realizing. Sorry, a bit of indigestion. So that's what I would recommend. Now, with a series like this, with a show like this, and working on a tight schedule and budget, what I would try to do is compose the entire thing within one sequence. And what I would do between the sequences, if I want to change the tempo and stuff, is adjust tempos so things remain in sync. But a lot of you may indeed want to separate stuff out into separate cues and then just save them down separately. At some point, what you'll need to do is present it back to us. So if you're going to do it as separate cues, which are where the music starts, where the music stops, it's the bit in between the start and the stop is a cue. And what I would do is basically each individual file, I'd bounce the music, just the music, and then create a master Logic or Pro Tools or Cubase file where you can then mix the music against the dialogue and export it as a single film. That's what we need back from you. So whatever way you decide to do it. One of the complications of basically scoring something in a single session like this is if you get a cut picture, because obviously something that's in sync over there, they may not have edited this sequence whatsoever, but maybe if they've edited this sequence and you've lost a few frames, suddenly this is going to be out of sync. What I will then do is alter the tempi in the middle so we're all matched up there. And this is maybe something that I'll do in more detail in another workshop. But basically, what I would recommend doing as a first step is to isolate where the music is, and that more often than not is as good as an indication as any of where the producer and the director and the editor is expecting you to write the music. I would identify the different areas. I would listen to the temp, make a note of where things start, where things stop, where things change, where things modulate, where a bit of rhythm comes in and out. These are the things that they're going to miss, as I said before. And then what I would do is actually walk away from the picture, walk away from the temp, is have a think about it, and then actually write some music. I think that we're so often completely tied up in the box, into the picture, into the different sounds we're using, that we forget to actually compose something. And what I would recommend, particularly with a subject matter like this, is to write a 2 or 3 minute track of music. And if you looked at the workshop last week, which Alan, if you can, will link in the video description down below, you'll see how I took a single composition and exploded it into sections. One of the mistakes that I hear, not mistakes, but one of the things that I hear often in scores is people just taking the same bit of music and starting it again and again and again. There's this horrible kind of repetitious thing that happens. I also hear a lot people starting a cue and then the next cue is like a completely different piece of music. I think what's much more natural if you're developing a conversation with your listener is to take a single piece of music and to break it up and stretch it out. So you've got these big pauses in the middle parts of this music, but you kind of pick it up. So instead of starting and stopping, starting and stopping, starting and stopping, you're starting, pausing, resuming, pausing, resuming, pausing. This, to me, sounds like a much more natural way to do it. Say, for example, you write a piece of music that has a second subject, or for the sake of the songwriters amongst us, goes from a verse to something that sounds a bit chorusy. If you imagine you go verse, chorus, and then you pause, and then you have a little bit of a gap, and then maybe you come back in on the chorus, and then you return to that verse, and it has that familiarity. So you can stray away in a different subject and then come back to something that they're already familiar with. And what's so good about doing stuff in a very musical sense in that respect is that people find it more comfortable to watch. They're not noticing the music, which is unfortunately part of the name of the game for us. So that's the way I would approach starting, is to create a piece of music. And this is where the brief comes in. The brief is to take the essence of the period being talked about, the turn of the century, the teens of the 20th century, the Impressionists, and imagine if, say, Debussy or Satie or one of their contemporaries was making music today, what would that sound like? The essence of them. We'd really rather you didn't cover Debussy or Satie or just whack a toise gynocienne or gymnopédie in. Instead, maybe see if you can get... Sometimes it just is like one pointer, one little ingredient that is from that era that points towards it, is all it takes. And I guess if I had any pointers for my understanding of that era, is the collapse of the standard idea of key and tonality, and the music became a lot more modal. One of the easiest tricks to do is to work in C major, so C major scale. Maybe, yeah. Oh, that's not going to do anything if we're not on the right track. Is literally just sit on the D and play a C major scale over the D. This becomes the mode of D Dorian. And suddenly, a very different kind of spirit. And just kind of fuck around with it. Maybe do some little thirds. Another thing that I believe Debussy did was this create this idea of tonal ambiguity. So where instead of playing triads, a root, third and a fifth, which gives you a sense of a minor chord, he played things that were would have had you like put on a furnace in previous centuries. Played things like tritones, and again just hitting D. Has an element of jazz to it, but the jazz was filtering, jazz music was filtering back through from the States into France. And you can, my A-level piece was, I'm not going to say the word, it was the Golly W's Cakewalk, which was by Debussy. Very, very jazzy piece. Could almost have come from like Scott Joplin's Canon. So there are those influences creeping in. The other thing that they were doing is they were doing this thing where what they were playing was chromatic, i.e., when your key modulates, so maybe goes from one key to another, but they weren't bothering going through the palaver of doing attractive modulations. They would literally switch between keys. So creating something that's Satie-esque, let's start with like the D Dorian. And I'm just going to go to G minor. and then the F minor. Back to the D minor. And then the G minor, let's go up an octave. It has a real sense of that era because people didn't do that before then. It was broken down for them during the Romantic era, where arseholes like Wagner just modulated music off the planet and suddenly freed everyone up to go, oh God, can't be bothered with doing that. Well, I'm just going to switch keys whenever I want to. And those interesting, sudden turns became very much a signature of the era. So there are three objectives that we'd like you to adhere to with this. One is we would love to hear a piece of music that has been exploded across several scenes or cues. So we get a sense of things moving, not necessarily developing or changing, but the sense that we're not just starting the same piece of music again, or indeed just changing to another piece of music. So that's the first thing we'll be judging you on. That I guess is more of a technical requirement that maybe a client wouldn't ask of you, but the way that they would put it is we want there to feel like there's this voice, there's a cohesion between cues. They want it to be smooth and natural and flowing. And secondly, the musical brief is to imagine some impressionistic music, impressionism of the earlier 20th century, but by using maybe modern scoring sounds or technology or the DAW, whatever you feel, gives a sense of how these two eras are connected. And thirdly, when you present it back to us, you've got to really pay attention to the dialogue. Dialogue is king, unless you're Paul Thomas Anderson or what's his name in Inception? Christian Henson. Thank you very much, Alan. And so as a consequence, and particularly as I spoke about last week, again, video linked in the description down below, particularly with documentaries stuff, you'll get audiences of all ages watching. The older you get, the more difficult it is to separate auditory elements, music, sound, dialogue. So it's really, really important that you always work with dialogue as master. But this is why I say get away from the computer or get away from looking at the picture, get away from the dialogue to actually write a piece of music that you think conjures the right spirit. Because the minute you put the dialogue in, you should leave it in and it should be the loudest thing in the room. And it's quite difficult to do that because you want to kind of hear what you're doing. The problem is, no matter how interesting and complex the music you're doing is and how intricate and all of that kind of stuff, if it fucks with the dialogue, they will either reject it or just turn it the fuck down. And I think one of my repetitive disappointments in my formative years, particularly when I did hundreds of documentaries or hundreds of episodes of various different documentaries, including ones about porn stars. One of the perennial disappointments I suffered from was you can't even hear the music. You can just about hear the hi-hats. And actually, if I was to look back on that period, it wasn't because of laziness of the dubbing engineer. They have an allotted amount of time to work in. They don't want to ride your music like a rodeo bull. So they just turn it the fuck down. And had I paid attention to the dialogue and melodic elements maybe clashing in with what people were saying, had I spent attention carving stuff out, then maybe the music would have been louder, and maybe people will hear it, and then maybe people will give you more work, or indeed some jury panels will hear it and give you some awards. Big mistake that I made, and a lot of it's to do with ego, and it's part of this job is abandoning that and understanding your role as a musician, which will lead me on to the comment I'm going to make in a minute. So, two ways to approach tackling dialogue? Well, actually 3 ways. One is just simply mix your music down, and before presenting it back to client, go in, automate it, basically riding your music around the dialogue so it's clear of it. It's a very unsophisticated, unelegant way of doing it, but effective. The next thing to do is to break your music into stems and automate those stems. And in fact, it's something that I really do recommend doing if you have time when you're composing, is to render stuff out as audio, because editing audio and automating audio and working with it is quite a good way of divorcing yourself from the ego or the temptation to really go back into the MIDI. So I think that can be a really good process and an interesting way of handling your music in a slightly less respectful manner. But the most, I would say, sophisticated and elegant way of carving stuff out for dialogue is to compose around it. And for those of you who have ever been in a jazz band or, working with a singer playing live where the parts aren't particularly fixed, you will get used to playing or vamping, comping around what the singer's singing. So, hey baby, how you doing tonight? That kind of stuff. It's exactly the same principle with dialogue on screen. So those are the 3 methods that I would recommend. Now, I'm going to really mark you down if you send us stuff that obliterates dialogue because you want us to hear how brilliant your work is. This is the mistake I've made so many times, sending stuff to directors, going, listen to all those notes and the polyrhythms and this, that, and the other. They don't care. They want you to help tell a story. So this is something that we really will judge everyone on. So hit the brief. Like to hear a composition that's been exploded, and make sure it works around the dialogue. Whatever way you decide to do it is separate cues or it's just one file. What we'll need back off you is a movie with your music on. Make sure you don't send it with the original music on as well. And we'll judge you on that. Everything else is on that page. If you go to the crowhillcompany.com, go to the hub and go to challenges there. This is the Les Parisiennes. That was a terrible pronunciation, Alan. Don't laugh at me.